Good evening. Good afternoon, actually. Are you there? Can you hear me? Okay, thank you. Today we are meeting actually on a live basis. Last week I had a recorded session. I hope you had a chance to go through the session. Did you? Were you, online at the same time and listen to the video? I recommend if you have not done, please do it. So do it because I discuss some of the important aspects of this discussion, like forward exchange rate. So it's better you look at the uh, video at least uh, for the last week. Now today we are moving into a new session, financial markets and products, part 2. In this session, I'll be basically looking at the in the previous session, we broadly covered the market. And when we were talking about the market, we looked at the products to some extent. Here and there, we basically linked some of the products in the previous session. Now, in this session, we are entirely focusing on the products that are traded in the financial markets. So what do we mean by financial products? So instruments, let's say instruments, financial instruments. They are actually the contracts that create some financial asset of one entity and a financial liability, or maybe when we may call it an equity instrument of another instrument, or you can call it a financial instrument is a contract that creates an asset as well as a liability during the transaction. Or you can call it a tradable asset of any kind. Financial instrument is a tradable asset of any kind. These assets can be in various forms like cash. It could be an evidence of an ownership, which means an equity. Could be a long-term contract between two parties like a bond or a loan. Likewise. So these instruments, in this diagram, we have various instruments given like deposits, loans, treasury bills and bonds, commercial papers, debentures, corporate bonds, asset-backed securities, leases and financial leases and hire purchases, shares, debentures. All these are financial instruments, and all these can be determined or defined by the definition that we have used. All these are tradable assets that creates a liability to one party and an asset to another party. Now, from this point onwards, we are looking at these instruments in detail, and their features and various aspects related to these financial instruments are covered in this session. Okay. Let me start with discussing the very basic and the famous instrument that we use in financial market. I think many of us are familiar with this instrument, that is basically the deposits, right? So we start with deposits. Deposits are actually sum of money placed with a financial institution for credit to a customer's account. Now, if you have accumulated some amount of cash and excess cash, you may call it excess in excess of consumption, but you have, that's a saving. That saving can be deposited in a financial institution by way of money, and by depositing you are creating a credit to your account. Okay? So deposits are a kind of a attribute of a saving, or is a one mode of a saving. and you may call it as an investment also. Deposit is an investment in a way, because you are saving money and you are earning a return out of that. So it's an investment actually. So these deposits can be identified mainly. There are three types of deposits: demand deposits, savings deposits, fixed or time deposits. These are the main three deposits that we observe. And also you can add another category like call deposits. So what do we mean by these certain instruments? Now all these instruments in general are part of savings, as I said, that creates a kind of a resource base in the financial institution and to the economy. And this resource based savings is a source of investment in a country. So these savings are basically a source of investment, which means you can create assets using these savings. You can create physical assets using these savings. So in that sense, these deposits are really important. And let's look at these different instruments, deposits in detail. Now, demand deposits, you also call them as current accounts. Current accounts. Some countries, they use the term current accounts, or in most of the cases you call it demand deposits. It is in some countries they use the term checkable deposits. Checkable deposits, which means you use checks. Let me type it on the chat box. Checkable deposits. In US, they use the term checkable deposit, which means based on the checks. Okay. Now, these accounts are actually, deposits are used mainly for transaction purposes. Here, actually, you don't have any savings motive, or you don't have any investment motive in a demand deposit. Demand deposit, you use it for transactions, to facilitate transactions, because whatever you deposit in this account can be withdrawn at any time on demand. Can withdraw at any time on demand. Whenever you want to withdraw money out of the demand deposit, you can do it. You only use an instrument called a check, a negotiable instrument called a check. By writing a check, you can withdraw money of a demand deposit. And also, if you have a demand deposit linked to a kind of a ATM or a card, you can withdraw money out of that. You don't need to have a check. Check can be given for a third party transaction, and using that check also you can withdraw funds. Now, one of the important feature of a demand deposit is they do not earn any interest. Whenever you deposit money in a demand deposit, until such time you withdraw, that money will stay there. It does not earn any interest generally. In some countries, for example, in US, there are interest earning demand deposits as well, but mainly conceptually, there are no interest on these demand deposits. And these deposits are considered as highly liquid deposits. And as a result, if you recall our money discussion, demand deposits are included straight after currency and notes. So currency and notes are 100% liquid, that is M0. Demand deposits are closer to 100% liquidity, which means M1. Okay, so in that sense, they are considered as high liquid deposits. And there are some services attached to a demand deposit, or a demand deposit holder will get some certain facilities from the bank. They get a kind of a checkbook or check facilities. Check is a negotiable instrument, as I said. You can do transactions using a check. You can withdraw money. You can make a payment to another party using a check. And you can give standing orders against your demand deposit, which means at a particular point in time, you can give an instruction to the bank to deduct some of the money from your account and transfer that money to a particular other account, or you can make a payment, any other payment. So it's a kind of a standing order. You give a particular amount at a particular date, and the bank will execute that transactions by the given date, but you should ensure that you have enough balances money in the account. Okay. And also, as I said, ATM cards or debit cards, they are attached to link to this instrument, the deposit, and in that sense, the payment and withdrawal process is facilitated through electronic modes. Now, I have not mentioned here demand deposit holders or current account holders. They have a special facility from the bank. They can overdraw the account. Overdraw the account. Overdraw means you can utilize money more than the balance you have in your account. Let's say you want to make a payment for 150,000 and you only have 100,000 in your account. So balance 50,000 is not sufficient in your account. No balance for that amount. You can ask the bank to give you a kind of a temporary facility by crediting your account by 50,000. So the bank's facility, you call it an overdraft. Overdraft in Sinhala, you call it an IRA. So this overdraft, actually these overdrafts are used mainly by companies, businesses, firms. And usually there are two types of overdrafts: temporary overdrafts and a permanent overdraft. Temporary overdraft means you borrow excess amount than your account on a temporary basis. Permanent overdraft means you get a continuous credit line. Sometimes you call it a revolving credit line. So that purpose, that loan facility is continuously available. You can overdraw your account at any time, any number of times, but given based on a certain upper limit. So these are provided for good customers in the banks to overdraw the account. But of course, for overdrafts, you have to make a payment, which means an interest is charged. Usually, interest rates for overdrafts are high because this is a uncollateral loan. Uncollateral loan means based on your current account, you take a loan, but you don't have any underlying security there. So in that sense, it's an uncollateralized loan. That uncollateralized loan is simply provided by banks as a facility to the customers, right? Then we have savings deposits. They are earning interest calculated on a daily, weekly, monthly, annual basis. Funds can be withdrawn at any time from your savings account. So any number of transactions can be done using your account. Banks are usually issuing a passbook. Earlier, it was a kind of a printed hard copy. Now banks are issuing e-passbooks, which means in electronic form. And your transactions are recorded in the statement, so you can have detailed statements for your transactions as a savings deposit holder. There are also, you get certain services like ATM cards, debit cards, or any other facilities. Even the credit cards you can apply if you are a customer in a bank by having a savings account. Fixed or time deposit is considered as an investment deposit, which means you place funds for a specific period. It could be short term, let's say 7-day fixed deposit, but usually in banks you have in Sri Lanka 1 month fixed deposit. That is the lowest period. 1 month to maybe 60 months, 5 years. You place funds for that specific period. If you agree with 1 month, you place funds for 1 month. If you agree for 5 years, you place funds for 5 years without withdrawing. So these are fixed amounts, fixed for specific period. Now, when you have a fixed deposit, you earn a higher interest compared to a savings deposit because you are making an investment with the bank, and that bank can use that money for their long-term purposes. So in that sense, banks are generally paying a high interest on fixed or time deposits compared to savings. Okay. These accounts can be short term, as I said, 1 month or 3 months, likewise, or medium term, long term. Most cases, your deposits are, maximum up to 5 years in many cases. Funds you can withdraw from the bank, from the account at any point. But if you are withdrawing a kind of a time deposit, you have to give some prior notice to the bank if it is before the maturity date. Okay. So funds you can withdraw, as I said, before the maturity date, but you have to give some prior notice to the bank, because in a savings account, demand deposit, you can withdraw at any point, but these funds are invested by the bank or given loans as given as loans to others for a longer period. So in that sense, the bank is unable to pay you a deposit whenever you ask suddenly. So you have to give some notice to the bank, prior notice, that you are going to withdraw money. Otherwise, that will create some problem to the bank. In any case, whenever you withdraw in advance before the maturity, you have to pay a penalty. Penalty in the sense, probably in most cases, banks would reduce the interest paid on the fixed deposit. So they will give you at the savings rate at a reduced interest rate. So that is there. Customers can use this FD, you call it FD, for other purposes, like you can have a facility against the FD, a loan facility. Most banks, they give loan facilities based on fixed deposits. I think up to 90% is given by many banks, because the bank does not have any risk, because there is funds. The deposit is a kind of a security, collateral. So the bank does not have any credit risk. Even if you not pay the loan, the bank would be able to recover using your FD. Okay. So these three things, demand deposit, savings deposits, FD, if you arrange this according to their liquidity, which means the high liquid nature, the demand deposits have the highest liquidity, savings then second, time deposits, they are considered as less liquid, because people do not transact using the time deposits like the other two deposits, right? Now, banks are also offering call deposits. Call deposits are considered as a kind of a mix of demand and savings deposit, which means it's a kind of a savings and a checking account. No deposit period or fixed deposit period. You can access your funds instantaneously, suddenly. You can withdraw any amount of money depending on the balance you have. No restriction. You also get an interest. Now in the demand deposit, you don't get any interest. Savings deposit, you get some interest. So this call deposit, it has the feature of the savings deposit. You get a kind of a interest on them. So these are also provided by banks, and that facilitate short-term deposits of the customers. When the customers have money for a shorter period, let's say 2-3 days, they can use a call deposit to deposit money. Most of the deposits are up to 7 days, actually, call deposits. Then the other most famous instrument that we know, loans. Loan is basically provided by financial institutions. Could be a bank, could be an unbank, any institution. It is actually a contract between the lender and the borrower. The feature of the loan is a kind of a contract between two parties, lender and the borrower. So what is this contract? It is actually a specified sum of money provided by the lender. Lender can be an individual or a financial institution to a borrower. So when you give this loan to the borrower, there are some conditions. What are the conditions? You repay it either in installments or all at once on agreed dates and at an agreed rate of interest. So you can specify the loan as a loan is a specified sum of money provided by the lender to a borrower on the condition that it is repaid either on installment or at once on an agreed date at an agreed rate of interest. So loans are given for a fixed period. Since it is a contract, there is a fixed period actually. And during that period, the borrower agrees to pay the lenders the capital of the loan. The capital means the original loan with interest. Interest means the cost of money, the rent for the money, you have to pay an interest. And that capital and interest can be paid either in installments or at once. Most of the cases, you are servicing it as an installment basis loans, right? So the most important thing is you are entering into a contract at a certain date and to be paid by a certain date, the loan with the interest. Interest can be either at fixed rate or a variable rate. Fixed rate means at the beginning of the contract, you fix the rate. You would say, okay, 10% is the rate. So during the remainder of the contract, it is 10%. Do not change. It does not change. Variable rates, actually, you enter into a contract to a variable rate means depending on the market rate movements, your interest rate could be different. So let's say you borrow 100,000 at a variable rate means at the time of borrowing, you have a specific rate. And whenever you servicing or paying the loan and also when you repay the loan fully, the rates could be different. Okay, so that rates are varying means very well interest rates or floating interest rates. Now, when a financial institution lends, even an individual informal lender lends, they require some sort of security. Now, loan market is basically working based on collaterals. Collateral means the security. So you have to pledge a security when you want to borrow. Let's say you want to borrow 100,000 from a bank, you have to keep a deposit in terms of a security, in terms of cash deposits if you have a current some kind of an account with the bank, or you can keep a real estate like a mortgage. You can mortgage your house or things like that. Okay, so some security is needed. Most of the loans are securitized, which means you have to have some collateralized loan. But there are some loans without any collateral. As I said, OD is an uncollateralized loan. Coal market loans are uncollateralized. You don't need to have a collateral when you borrow in the coal or lend in the coal market. But otherwise, from the general customers, you have to have a collateral. Now, in personal loans, you don't have a collateral. In a credit card loan, you don't have a collateral. That's true. But you have to have a strong recommendation and also some kind of a guarantor to ensure that you are kind of an eligible borrower. You are a reliable borrower, which means you will repay with the loan. That needs to be there. Otherwise, uh, most of the time, loans are collateralized. Right? Banks or the financial institutions are providing at a cost, which means the interest, as I said, it could be a fixed rate or a variable rate. Whatever, the interest is a kind of an incentive to the lender to lend. You have to have an incentive for the lender in order to lend. So that incentive is some return for your money that you lend. Okay. So then let's look at types of loans. As I said, there are some secured loans, which means borrower is pledging an asset. Could be a property, could be cash, could be a security. For example, if you have treasury bills bonds, you can pledge and get a loan. If you have cash, let's say foreign currency, you can pledge and get a loan. If you have a deposit, you can pledge and get a loan. All these are securitized or collateralized loan. You can call it collateralized. I will type that word. Collateralized. Collateralized loan. Okay. Unsecured. Now, for example, if you are buying a house, you take a secured loan. Why? You pledge your house as a mortgage. Banks are borrowing from the central bank under the reverse repurchase facility. That's a loan. So banks are pledging securities, which means treasury bills bonds to borrow. So all these are secured loans. Unsecured means monetary loans that are not secured by any borrower's assets. So when you borrow, you don't have any security. Now, as I said, a personal loan can be considered as an unsecured loan because you don't have any security, only a guarantee you have, guarantor you have. And different financial institutions may be having different types of unsecured loans. The most common ones are the credit card debt. In the credit card, you are using without any collateral. Now, let's say you have a credit card and you go to a shop, the fashion house of fashion, and you use the credit card, and which means the bank is creating a loan on behalf of your transaction under your name. So the transaction is a loan, but there are no collaterals involved. Uncollateralized loan, unsecured loan. As I said, a personal loan is an unsecured loan. Bank overdraft, that is also I mentioned at the beginning. When you overdraw your account, you don't keep any securities. Any kind of a security is not pledged. So all these are unsecured loan. So that is one type of categorization. And there's another type of categorization, subsidized and concessional. Subsidized means your interest is hidden. Or you would say your interest is reduced by an explicit or hidden subsidy. Now, in an interest rate subsidy, you are only paying a reduced interest. Let's say if you take an agricultural loan, student loan, the bank would say, okay, our normal interest is 10%, but we'll give you an educational loan at 5%. What does that mean? The bank is incurring a loss of 5%? No. The bank is giving you the loan at a reduced interest rate, and the difference, that 10 minus 5% means 5% difference, is borne by someone else. It could be the government, could be the central bank. Now, for example, these days we have a kind of an interest subsidy scheme, right? Interest subsidy scheme for under this COVID period. The banks are giving loans at a reduced interest rate, 4%, for the customers. but their actual cost is, let's say, 8%, 9%. The difference, 4%, 5%, is borne by the government or the central bank. So subsidize means the interest rate is reduced explicitly or implicitly to the customer, but the actual cost to the lender is, the same. It is borne by someone else. Concessional means granting some terms, generous terms than the market loans. For example, under concessional loans, the lender would charge you interest rates below the market rate. For example, the World Bank is giving loans to Sri Lanka at concessional rates, which means the market rate is something else, but they are giving at a lower rate, a reduced interest rate. Or they can give a grace period to repay. Now, the World Bank loans, you start, for example, you start repaying after 2 years. So initial period, you have some comfort. You don't have to service the loan. So these are some concessions given by the lender to the borrower. So most of the concessional loans are actually the government loans, the coming to the government as a support, and even the employees of a company can be given a concessional rate. Now, for example, most institutions, they are giving housing loans. So housing loans are roughly 1%, 2% at low rates, which means that is given by the provided by the institution as a kind of a concession to the borrower. So deposit and loans are the most basic type of financial instruments in the economy. And then let's look at debt and equity instruments in the financial markets. So debt and equity, actually, these markets, we know debt market and equity market, we divide it by looking at the nature of the instrument. So these two instruments are serving the investors in different ways. Now let's look at each and every instrument separately. Debt and equity, these are most important instruments in the financial markets. Let's start with debt. Okay. Debt means when you have a debt instrument, there is no ownership interest in this debt portion. Let's say you have given a loan to someone at a particular interest rate, 100,000, to a company, let's say. Now, by giving that loan to that company, you are not intending to have an ownership or part of the ownership of that company. You don't need it. You only give a loan as a funding support, and the borrower who has taken this loan creates a liability in his accounts, owing some money to be paid to the lender. So there is no ownership interest. So when the lenders lend, you call them as creditors. They do not have any voting rights. For example, whenever you give a loan to the government by way of buying treasury bills or bonds, you don't ask for voting rights, right? Like a company. So in the company also, if you are a debtor, you don't have, if you are a creditor, which means you have given a loan to someone, to the company, you don't have any right to have voting powers. Okay, so no voting is involved. For debt, you have to pay an interest, that is the compensation for usage of the debt money. And this interest is considered as cost of doing business. So cost of doing business means the rent that you pay for the usage of money. And usually interest rate is tax deductible, which means if you have debt in your balance sheet, if you are paying interest on that debt component, you can use it for adjusting taxes. So your tax liability will be lower by that amount. So you don't have to pay taxes. So it is tax deductible, the interest. However, creditors can take a legal action if interest or principal is not paid. If it is missed, you can take an action against the uh, borrower. Right? For example, you borrow some amount and you default, or you do not pay regularly. So the creditor, as the lender, can take a decision. Now, debt can be used to finance a project or a person, but it is understood that excessive debt is not good. So whenever you have high amount of debt in your firm, in your country, wherever, so the high amount of debt can lead to financial distress or bankruptcy of a company. Now you can apply this to a country. People would normally say, don't have excess debt. Why? That could lead to bankruptcy of the institution. So it is possible. Excess debt is creating some risk to the financial institution. So when, let's say, people are starting to default, that is creating some distress to the company. So more debt, more stress. So in that sense, the most riskier companies are considered to have high debt in their balance sheet. So whenever you have more debt, that creates more vulnerability, more risk to the financial institution. So that is all about debt. Equity means, sometimes we use various terms for equity. You call it shares, stocks, common stocks. All these relate to equity. So whenever you have equity instrument, that instrument has the ownership interest. Ownership interest means equity is a kind of a certification of the ownership. Let's say I have 100 shares of John Keels. So that 100 shares of John Keels indicate I have the ownership to the extent of the share of 100 shares. So up to that limit, I have the ownership of this company. So even if you have one share, you have the ownership interest. Probably if you look at the annual reports, you will see there are some shareholders, they are only having only one share, which means they have the ownership claim for the company. Shareholders or the equity holders, they have voting powers. You can elect the board of directors, who is the running mechanism or the operational mechanism of the institution, or you can vote on any other issues at the AGM or at the board of meetings, whatever. So you have the power to vote. Now for equity, you get a dividend. Dividend is a kind of a distributed profit. Dividends are actually coming as a result of profit distribution. So when a company is distributing profits, it is not a part of the cost of the business. It is not part of the cost of the business. Interest is cost of the business. Dividends is not a cost of the business, but it is a sign or an indication of your surplus, which means your profit. You can't distribute dividends if you don't have profits. So dividends are an indication of profit. So those profits are generally not tax deductible. So for interest or for debt, you have tax deductibility, but for equity, you cannot deduct it for taxes, which means you have to pay taxes for dividends. Dividends are not a liability of the firm until it is declared. You cannot simply ask a company to, pay dividends if it is not, if it has not been declared. You can't ask, or you don't have any legal action can be taken if dividends are not declared. Let's say company A does not pay any dividend, but you can go and ask for a kind of a legal action on such cases. So dividends are not a liability of the firm until it is declared, or shareholders do not have any legal recourse if dividends are not declared. And I told you, whenever you have more debt in a firm, that firm is very vulnerable, could lead to a, some vulnerability, some collapse even due to high debt. Similarly, if you take a firm with 100% equity, 100% equity means the firm is entirely owned by outsiders, entirely owned by shareholders, which means no debt is there in the balance sheet. So all equity means 100% shares. So if you have 100% shares, generally it cannot go bankrupt. You can't declare the bankruptcy when it is a all equity firm. So all equity firm is naturally responsible for the company. So in that case, you can't simply declare any bankruptcy. Then let's look at different types of bond instruments or different types of debt instruments. Now, debt instruments, the most popular debt instrument is actually bonds. Even a loan is a debt instrument. If you take a loan, in a way it's a debt instrument. But whenever we talk about debt instruments, we mainly focus on the bonds. A bond is a debt instrument with a kind of a certificate showing that the borrower owes a specified sum. Let's say the government is issuing a bond to borrow money from the public. So for that matter, government is issuing a certificate. That certificate is a treasury bill or a bond. So in that certificate, there are specific value mentioned. For example, let's say 1 million. So which means as the borrower, the government owes 1 million rupees to the investor. So who has bought this treasury bill has a right to claim for 1 million at the time of maturity, because the instrument is has agreed to pay that amount. So normally you call these bonds as fixed income securities, fixed income securities, because the income for a bond is a regular cash flow. You will see in the following slide. So whenever you have a bond, you have regular cash flow or fixed income for a bond. At every frequency, a specific frequency or a specific time period, you get a regular cash flow, fixed income. Generally, bonds are issued by governments or corporates to raise capital, which means to raise money from investors in exchange of their future payments. So that is done by the governments as a method of raising capital, or maybe to settle their debt. Corporates are raising capital actually mainly for the purpose of investments. Governments have some, short-term cash issues. In that sense, the governments are issuing bonds actually to finance its cash flow, its day-to-day routine. But sometimes for long-term purposes also they can borrow. For example, for a project, they can raise money issuing a bond. So in that sense, these are used as a method of raising capital. So what are the key features of a bond instrument? The first two are the coupon rate and the coupon payment. Coupon rate is actually the interest on the bond which generates cash income. So in the bond, let's say the bond, you buy a 1,000 value bond. So in the 1,000 value bond, you have 10% interest rate, coupon rate. What does that mean? Out of this 1,000, you get 100 as a cash income. So coupon payment is that cash income. So that coupon payment can be paid maybe quarterly, biannually, or annually. Depending on the interest amount, you get a cash income. So the coupon rate and the coupon payment indicate the cash income derived out of a bond's face value. What do you mean by face value? Face value is what is mentioned on the surface of the bond. On the face of the bond, what is mentioned as the value? Usually it is some common multiple values like 100, 1,000, 10,000. Likewise, most of the cases, the bond values are taken as face value is taken as 1,000. Right? So the face value is what is mentioned on the value, on the bond. Time to maturity, the remaining maturity period of the bond. Let's say you issue a bond today for 5 years. So the bond's maturity is 5 years. Remaining maturity or time to maturity is 5 years. Okay, from today there are 5 more years to the maturity. Let's say after 2 years, if you take this bond, what is the remaining maturity? Now it is not 5 years, it is now 3 years because there are 3 more years to the maturity of the bond. So always when you say the maturity, it is time to maturity, remaining maturity. Required rate of return means what do you earn out of this bond. It is not the coupon rate. Coupon rate, as I said, it is used to generate cash income. Required rate of return indicates the true return of the bond. So sometimes you call it yield to maturity, YTM, yield to maturity. If you hold this bond until the maturity, how much you will earn. That is the idea of yield to maturity or required rate of return. So those are the key features of bonds, and bonds are generally tradable. In good old days, bonds are actually used for passive investments. Passive means you buy and you keep it till the maturity. Now, most of the bonds are not passive, they are active investments, which means they are tradable. At any point in time, you can trade a bond. You can sell a bond, you can buy a bond. By using these features, you can value a bond and do a certain transaction, either to sell or buy a bond. So by selling and buying bonds, you can make income, you can make returns, right? So in that sense, they are tradable. Now, related to the bonds, I am going to discuss some important concepts here, few important concepts here in this part, right? So one is actually interest and capital gains. Interest means I already mentioned coupon. Coupon. Capital gain means simply the price difference, right? I'll get an example, then you will understand. Now, in that sense, a bond is having two types of cash flows. Or if you have a bond, there are two ways to make money of the bond, from the bond. Two ways of earning money. What are these two ways? One way, you can have the cash income of the bond based on the coupon interest rate. Cash income based on the coupon interest rate. That is one type of income. The other type of income, as I said, the changes in prices in the market will generate capital gains. Changes in the market of the bond, prices of the bond will generate some capital gains, or even it could be capital losses. If the prices go down, it could be a capital loss, either way. So in this example, we can identify these two cash flows. So let's say we have 1,000 value bond. Now, can someone tell me what is this 1,000? Can someone suggest what is this 1,000? So do we have our colleagues here? Yes. Known people are there. So what do you mean by this 1,000? Yes, Dilshani, that is the face value. So face value is 1,000. And for this 1,000 face value bond, the interest is specified as 6%. That 6% is considered as what? Coupon interest rate. Now, if you hold this bond for 5 years until the maturity, what is the amount you collect out of this bond? Now, here I have drawn a timeline in this part, right? Up to from the principal, year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5. Year 5 is the maturity. Up to that point, how much you earn as the interest. To calculate that, you should know the interest rate. Now we already know it's 6%. And you have to have the face value, that is 1,000. Then you can calculate the coupon payment every year. So every year the bond is getting a coupon of 6%. So which means every year 1,000 into 6% you get as the coupon, that is 60. Every year you get 60. Year 1 60 rupees, year 2 60 rupees, year 3 60 rupees, year 4 60 rupees, year 5 60 rupees. Till the maturity date you get 60, 60, 60, 60, altogether 300 rupees as the coupon payments or cash income. You can call it cash income. Now let's say this is paid annually, 6%. Now let's say 6% is paid half yearly. Then how much of rupees you get in a half year's time? Can someone answer? Let's say interest rate is 6%, paid semi-annually or half yearly. Now what is your cash income? Every 6 months you get a cash income of how much? Does anyone have any idea? Annually you get 60. If it is half yearly, how much you get? 30, exactly, Vimandi. Let's say it is every quarter, then you get 15 rupees. So this 15 in quarter 1, 15 quarter 2, 15 quarter 3, 15 quarter 4, altogether you get 15, 15, 15, 15, 6, altogether 60. So that is your cash income. So in 5 years time, the cash income, according to our example, 60 into 5 years, that is 300, right? So total principal and interest at the 5 years would be 1,300 with this capital gain, right? You will earn 300 excess. So that part is actually the interest component. Okay. Now let's say in 5 years time at the maturity, I'm moving to this second box. Earlier we were here, now I'm moving to this part. Now let's say your bond is 1,000 rupees and you can sell this bond at 1,100. Your face value is 1,000. You can sell it 1,000 at 1,100. So you can make a difference there. 1,100 minus 1,000 equal to 100. What do you call this? This 100 equals what? Can someone answer? You bought the bond at 1,000 face value. Now you sell it at 1,100. So the difference is 100. What do you call it? Can someone give me an answer? Dividend income. Okay, Vimandi. Let's say this is a bond. Okay. In the bonds, you are not actually getting dividends. In the bonds, what is equal to dividend is actually the coupons. So these are regular cash flows, regular income. So you can call it a kind of a dividend, but it is not dividend actually. Coupon. In an equity, actually you get dividends. That's correct. But what is this price difference? You sold it at 1,100, but you bought it at 1,000. So your profit equals 100. What is that profit? What do you call it? Capital gain, Apeksha, correct. So it is the capital gain. So you make 100 rupees worth capital gain by holding the security up to the maturity. So at the maturity period, if you are selling this bond at 1,100, you are earning 100 as your capital gain. Here you earn 300 as your coupon income. So what is the total income out of this bond? You earn 300 here, you earn 100 here. So altogether, total return of this bond is 400. Okay. Now let's say you have this capital gain 300, but at the end of the period you are selling the bond at 900, not 1,000. Bond price has gone up, your price is now down. You are selling at 900. Now you make a capital loss actually. So negative 100 capital loss. So in that sense, your total return out of the bond at the end of the period is 200 because you made a capital loss. So what I want to highlight here, not the numbers, the bond has two types of income flows. The first thing, the cash income or the coupon income. The second one is the capital gain, right? Those are the two types of income. Now that leads to this idea, holding period return. Holding period return. Now holding period return is the total return on the asset over the holding period. So during that 5 years time, what you have earned is the holding period return, the total period, the total return, HPR. Now this HPR or the total return has two components, the capital appreciation, cash income. In our example, capital appreciation is capital gain. Cash income means the coupon income. So the total return for this example, now here we saw you are earning 60 every year, total 300. You are selling the bond at 1100 and you make a gain of 100. So if you put those numbers into this equation, what is our total holding period return? So let me write it on the board. So your total holding period return in this case, the price difference, which means the capital gain, is how much? 100. 1100 minus 1000. This is our capital gain or capital appreciation. Plus we have 60 into 5 cash incomes, which means cash flows or coupon payments equal to 300 divided by our original price or the face value, which means 1000 into 100. So this is called as holding period return or total return. So capital appreciation, cash income. This could be a capital loss, but cash income would be there. It doesn't change. Okay. I hope it's clear. Now let's look at the bond prices and its relationship with the interest rate. Bond prices and the relationship with the interest rate. Now, in order to understand the bond prices and relationship with the interest rate, we use a concept of bond valuation. Bond valuation means calculating the bond prices, right? So when you calculate the bond price, which means you call it intrinsic value, sometimes in finance books, in finance tech, terms, you use the word intrinsic value. It is the present value of the bond, present value of the expected cash flow or the present value of the bond. That is the bond price. What is important for us, there is a negative relationship between bond prices and the interest rate. There is an inverse relationship between the interest rate, which means the yield to maturity actually, and the bond price. Now here in this chart, you can observe when the yield to maturity we know, if you hold the bond until the maturity, your earnings is given by the yield to maturity and the price is given on this axis. Now from this chart, what you can observe, when the interest rates are low, now this is actually coming from the bond valuation formula. We are not going to discuss it here because it does not have any relevance to our unit. But if you go into advanced finance, you will see how to calculate these bond prices, that is using the bond valuation formula. So based on this bond valuation formula, you get these numbers actually. At 4%, this is the price. At 8%, this is the price, likewise. So when you plot the calculated price against the respective interest rate, you get a negatively sloping curve, which means at lower interest rates, your bond price is higher. At higher interest rates, your bond prices are lower. Now, let's say you are buying a bond when the interest rates are high, 10%, right? Then in the economy, interest rates go down. It goes to 4%. Then what is your bond price now? You bought at 10%, the bond price was 900. Interest rates go down to 4%, now bond price is 1300. So what does that mean? Now you can make a capital gain. if you sell it. Lowering interest rates means good for you. You buy at high interest, sell at low interest, which means buy at a low price, sell at a high price. Clear? Let's say, on the other hand, you bought a bond at 6%. So when you bought the bond at 6%, your bond price was 1,100. And you hold it. After some time, you want to sell it. Now the bond interest rate is gone to 12%. Now what is the price? 800. Now you are making a capital loss of 300. So there is a clear relationship between the interest and the bond. When the interest rates are high, bond prices low. When interest rates are low, then the bond prices are high. So investors would like to buy at low price, which means high interest, sell at high price, which means at low interest. Okay, so that's why investors, portfolio managers, they are very concerned, and they are very closely monitoring the interest rates movements. Changes in interest rates would change the value of your bond. Entire portfolio would also change with that. So that is an important thing. Now remember, we were talking about, under financial risk, we were talking about interest risk. I hope you remember. So interest rate risk is here. So if interest rates are moving, let's say from this range to 12%, what is the risk? The bond price is also changing. So that is an important relationship in finance. Okay. Now, when people trade bonds, do trading bonds, they are basically looking at whether a particular bond is at a premium or a discount. Probably you may have heard the term premium bonds or discount bonds. Now, let me tell you the very simple definition for a premium bond and a discount bond. Very simple definition for a premium bond is, if your bond price is higher the face value, then you call it a premium bond. I'll write it on the board. If your bond price is higher than face value, let's say your bond price is 1,100. Your face value is 1,000. You call this as premium bonds. Premium bonds. Right? Then let's say you have one price lower than the face value. Let's say this is 900. You call it as a discount bond. So whenever you sell a bond, it could be at a premium, it could be at a discount. Premium means your price is above the face value. Discount means your price is below the face value. Now, this has a relationship between the interest and the coupon rate. Now, you can imagine another scenario here. What is the other scenario? Now, let's say these two are equal. Your bond price is 1,000 equals face value. Such bonds, you call them as par bonds. The bond is at a par. Par means equal. Right? Now, in this case, you can see a relationship. When a bond is at par, your coupon interest equals yield to maturity. Let's say coupon is 10%, yield to maturity is also 10%. Okay. In other words, premium bonds and discount bonds will have unequalized coupon and yield to maturity. So in this case, premium bond yield to maturity is higher than the coupon. In the discount, yield to maturity is lower than the coupon. Okay. You don't need to remember this part actually, because it is not into our key focus, but at least you should know these three terms: premium bond, discount bond, par bond. Premium means face value is higher than the bond price. Discount means face value is lower than the, premium means bond price is higher than the face value. Discount means bond price is lower than the face value. Par bond means bond price equals face value, right? That you have to keep in mind, because there could be some definitions in relation to the bonds. Okay, so that is some theoretical background of the bonds. Now, if you look at the examples, practical examples for bonds, what are the most popular examples for bonds? Government bonds, right? Treasury bills and bonds. So treasury bills and bonds are actually issued by the governments. They are guaranteed by the government and considered as the most safest bond investment, because they are issued by the government, and sometimes you call it default risk-free instruments. Treasury bills, bonds are default risk-free. Usually governments, they do not default. As a result, you call it as default risk-free. But other risk can be there. Now, for example, market risk is there. If you look at this scenario, market risk could be there. Price changes are there, but default risk is free. So as a result, some people call these bills bonds, government bills bonds, as gilt-edge securities. Gilt-edge. So if you see the term gilt-edge securities or gilts, which means government treasury bills or bonds, and they are tradable securities, which means you can have a secondary market. They are sold or purchased at the auctions, which means an open, transparent auction mechanism determines the prices. So it means their prices are market determined. Okay, so those are the most popular instruments. Now here I have a comparison for treasury bills and bonds, because we need these characteristics and we have to understand them very clearly, because sometimes there are questions in the exam. You have to write some definitions, some features of these instruments. So let's start with treasury bills. Treasury bills are considered as short-term government securities. Short-term government security means their maturity period is maximum 1 year. So as a result, we consider the treasury bills as money market instruments. Money market, even though it is issued by government as a bond or a bill, you call it as a money market instrument. Okay? Money market instrument up to 1 year. And they are the most marketable money market security. Now in the money market, there are other instruments as well. For example, in the money market, you have call transactions, you have repo transactions, all these are money market transactions. But the most marketable instrument is the treasury bill. So if you have treasury bills in your portfolio, they are considered as highly liquid instruments. Highly liquid instruments. These are issued generally, there are three types of maturities: 91 days, 182 days, or 364 days. So you call it 3 months, 6 month, 1 year treasury bills. This is the important part. Treasury bills are considered as zero coupon securities. In some books, you will see the word zero coupon bonds. I remember there was an exam question. Write down short notes on zero coupon bonds. What are the zero coupon bonds? They are actually treasury bills, because in a treasury bill, you don't have coupons. Every 91 day, 182 day, likewise, you don't get coupons. Right? You are getting the income of the treasury bill in a different way. So what is the income of a treasury bill? Treasury bills income is coming from the difference between the selling price and the face value. Selling price and the face value. I'll show you an example. So let's say you are buying a 3-month treasury bill. You want to buy a 3-month T-bill, right? So how do you buy? Usually, let's say their face value is given as common multiples. So let's say the face value is 100. So this is the value. Face value means at the maturity, you will get this value, 100. So at the maturity, you will get 100. Then what is your income? Income is coming from the buying price and the face value. So let's say you buy this at 90. This is the price of the bill. It's 90. So face value 100, buy at 90. You call it, you are buying at a discount. Buying at a discount. Always you buy a treasury bill at a discount, which means below the face value. At the maturity, you get this 100. Always you pay less. Then what is the income? Income is simply the difference between face value and the buying price against the buying price. So this is your return of the bond. Your income is the difference between the face value and the buying price. So you call it a discount. The discount is your income. Okay, paid at the maturity. The face value is the what is paid at the maturity. So here I have mentioned the difference between the purchase price and the face value is the interest income to the owner. That is the bonds return, bills return, sorry, treasury bills return. I told you these are the most liquid instruments, can be easily converted into cash at any point. They are very liquid, closer to 100%. So as a result, in banks, whenever you define most liquid assets, the number one liquid asset is cash. The second number one liquid asset is foreign currency. You can sell it at any time. The third important liquid asset is treasury bills. You can convert into cash at any point very quickly. So it's a very, very liquid instrument. So I hope you have some idea about treasury bills, or you call it zero coupon bonds. Then you have treasury bonds. Treasury bonds are considered as medium to long-term securities. Medium to long-term means more than 1 year, up to, let's say, 30 years, 40 years. Some countries issue 30-year bonds. Some countries issue 40-year bond. Mexico issued a 100-year bond. Long-term, very long-term instruments. So these are issued by the government as not money market instruments, but capital market instruments. They are actually part of the capital market. Bills are part of the money market. Bonds are part of the capital market or the long-term market. So as I said, mainly from 2 years to 30 years you can issue. These are interest-bearing securities. Now in treasury bills, you don't have any interest. It's only the interest income coming as a discount. These are bonds are interest-bearing because you have a coupon income attached to it. Treasury bonds are having a coupon. A cash flow is generated maybe every year, every 6 months or every quarter. That is the interest income. So let's say you have 5% coupon rate, which means every year you get 5% as the cash income. So it carries a regular cash flow. Treasury bonds are also tradable, even though they are long term. These are tradable, not like treasury bills, very similar to treasury bills, but these also can be traded in the secondary market. There is an active secondary market in many countries for treasury bonds as well. So bills, bonds, both can be traded in the secondary market. Now here, what is the income of a treasury bill or a bond? I have a small calculation here to understand this. BYE means bond value or bond yield equivalent. You can simply call it as the return. So what is the return of a treasury bill? The face value minus the bond price divided by bond price. So here what we have done, simply the face value minus the bond price. Face value is 100, bond price is 90, divided by 90. That is the discount part or the premium part, divided by T. T means time convention. Now if it is a bill with 3 months, the time convention would be 91 divided by 365. If it is 180 days, it could be 180 divided by 365. It is 1 year, 365 divided by 365, which means almost 1. So you can use this formula, FP divided, sorry, I'll write it here, clarity, to calculate the return of a bill. You can use divided by T. So if you take divided by T, it should be the fraction of time, 91 divided by 364, 365. Also, you can use this formula as F minus P divided by P multiplied by T. So if it is not multiplied by T, it should be 365 divided by. Here you get a fraction, here you get a whole number. So there you have an example given in the slide. Let's say I buy a face value 100 treasury bill at 98, and this bill is a 3-month bill. That would be my return or bond yield equivalent. So simply 100 minus 98 divided by 98 divided by 91 divided by 365 means 0.25. So if you calculate this part and multiply by 100, you have to if you want, you can multiply this by 100. So your bond value equal bond yield equivalent would be 8.186, or you can call it 8.2. Okay. Now I have an exam question, I think, in the next slide. Let me move. Yes. Now in this question, exactly a similar question is there. This is my example. This is from your exam paper. Now what do you have here? An investor buys 360-day treasury bill for 92 and holds it till maturity. Compute the annual yield rate for this investment. Now, how do you calculate? The first one, very easy. If you use this formula, in the first case, what is our face value? 100. Right? It's not given as 100, but if you are buying at 92, we can assume the convention of the bond will be, for the face value, will be 100 minus 92 divided by 92 multiplied by, in this case, you don't have to worry because it is 364, which means multiply by 1. So if you solve this part, you get answer as the 8.7. 8.7. Okay. Very easy. Now we have the second question. An investor buys a 182-day treasury bill at the price of 96. The most appropriate current yield rate of the treasury bill is. Now you have to do the calculation. Now it's very clear. Your treasury bill is face value we know 100, bought at 96, and it's a 182-day treasury bill. So you know the time factor. So you want to try this? What would be the answer? Your face value is 100. Price of the treasury bill is 96. And this is 6-month e-bill. What is the annual yield? Why don't you try? Okay, Dilshani has given an answer already. How about others? Others also want to try. Let me see a couple of answers from the others as well. Dilshani has already given an answer. How about others? I'm also calculating actually on my phone using the calculator. That is simply 100 minus 96 divided by 96 multiplied by 2 into 100. Can I have one more answer? Someone? We have our friends here in the list. Apeksha, Dilshani, she has already answered. Krishni, Mathura, Nashma, Rangi, Rosika, Sanduni, Tishara, Nashma, she says 2. Any other answers? Can I say one more answer? Then we'll go to the discussion. Rangi, 8.3. Tishara, 8.3. Yes. Let's see. I think most of you have done good. So this is 100. Now our price is 96 divided by 96. And here you multiply by how much? 364 divided by 182, which means here you get the difference is 4 divided by 96 multiplied by 2. So you get 8.33 something multiplied by 100. So I think it's very straightforward, and mind you, in many exam papers in the past couple of semesters, you see this question. Okay? So it's very easy, nothing to worry. You can easily get 2 marks. This is actually for 2 marks. Very simple calculation. So I recommend you look at these questions. And there's one more question here. What is a zero coupon bond? Did I discuss? Do you want me to answer? Can someone answer? What is a zero coupon bond? Straight away, give me the answer. A zero coupon bond is a what? Can someone answer? Who anyone want to answer? A zero coupon bond means what? A treasury bill, Vimandi. Yes. Treasury bill. So you, depending on the question, if it is a kind of a 5 marks question, you have to elaborate. Otherwise, what is a zero coupon bond? If you write treasury bill, you get 2 marks here straight away. If you want to explain it, you have to mention the features of a treasury bill. It's a short-term instrument in 3 types of maturities: 3 months, 6 months, 12 months. These are issued at discounts, and the difference between the price of the bond and the face value is the income, interest income. And you can say the bond is, the treasury bill is a most tradable security. Likewise, you can give some features. Right. Then let's move under bonds. There is an instrument called repurchase agreements. Repurchase agreements. So why I include this under repurchase agreements? When you why I have included repurchase agreements under bonds? Because most of the time, to engage in a repurchase transaction, you use bonds or bills. In other words, you use government securities. So what is a repurchase agreement? If you read this definition, you call it repo. If you read this definition, you will understand it's an arrangement of selling securities, the government securities usually, for cash at a specified price. That is important. Selling securities, I'm highlighting important points, for cash at a specified price with a commitment to repurchase the same at a fixed price on a future date. So what is the arrangement here? You agree to sell securities for cash. Let's say you are having securities, you sell those securities for cash because you need cash. And how do you sell securities for cash? You agree that you will buy back those securities on the following day or any other day at a fixed price. So you are repurchasing it. So the difference between the selling price and the repurchase price is the interest income. So we consider these repos or repurchase agreements as a loan. You are actually getting a loan You are taking cash means you are getting a loan. What is the security for the loan? Is the government securities, collateralized by the government securities. So a repo agreement is a collateralized loan using government securities. And as I said, these repos are short-term money market instrument. Now here I have an example, so that would be easier for us to understand the repo transaction. Now let's say I am the seller of the repo. Okay, I am the seller of the repo, so which means I sell government securities today. Let's say I sell 100 million government securities as collaterals to a lender of money, a person who has money, let's say a bank. I gave my securities to a bank and I obtain cash, right? I obtain cash. Giving security, obtain cash. That's the first leg of the transaction. Second leg of the transaction, at the maturity, let's say on the following day, most of the repos are overnight. Some are 1 month, some are 3 months, but mostly overnight. So at the maturity, let's say on the following day, I give cash back with an interest, right? That interest is the income for the lender. And I give it to the lender and I get my securities back. The government securities are returned to me. So today I borrow cash, giving securities. Tomorrow I'm giving back the cash and getting my securities back. That's why you call it a repo, repurchase transaction. So the agreement is called a reverse repo when viewed from the other side of the party. Now, for the lender of money, for him it's a reverse repo. Reverse repo means he is giving money, getting securities. On the following day, he is giving back the securities, getting his money back. I hope it's clear. Repurchase agreement. Selling or buying securities with an agreement to buy or sell the securities on the following day, right? I hope it's clear. Now, this repo reverse repo principle we apply somewhere else. The central bank is using this reverse repo concept in its operations. Can somebody tell me where? The central bank is using repos and reverse repos in their operations. In which operations? Can someone give me the name of that operation? Central banks do engage in this repo and reverse repo. For example, central banks give cash, getting securities back. Or central bank absorb cash, giving securities. What do you call this? Interbank call money market. There we don't have any securities. No securities involved. Interbank call money market is basically commercial banks are borrowing money or lending money and no collateral, which means no treasury bills, bonds. Keep it very clear, no collaterals, right? It's a uncollateralized market. Your answer is appreciated, but it's uncollateralized market. Can we try again? I know you have the answer. The central bank is buying securities, selling securities. You call it a specific name. What do you call it? It's a monetary policy tool. The central bank is having policy interest rates as a policy tool. There's one more important policy tool used by the central bank that is related to buying securities and selling securities. What do you call it? Any answer? Vimandi? Okrishni? Rangi? I'm just calling who have already answered. Dilshani, what do you call it? when central banks are having, let's say in the banking system, when there is excess money, central bank is getting that money and giving securities. Or let's say in the banking system, there's no money. The central bank is giving money and getting securities. On the following day, it is returned or reversed. That operation, we have a specific name. What do you call it? Policy rates. Okay, we do this using policy rates actually. You use these rates, correct? Using the policy rates, what do? You do a certain operation. What do you call it? Open market operations, correct, Vimandi? Open market operations. So in the open market, what does happen? The central bank is absorbing money when there is an excess by selling securities from the commercial banks. If there's a shortage in the market, the central bank is releasing money by getting securities. On the following day, the transaction is reversed. So this is actually the traditional repo, reverse repo transactions. Okay. So there is a market for repo and reverse repo transaction. You call it market repurchases. Central bank repo, reverse repo transactions, you call it open market operations, right? Keep that in mind. Good. I appreciate your effort. And then there are private bonds also. You call them as corporate bonds. Corporate bonds are private sector, medium to long-term bonds. Now, they are called as the private sector bonds because they are issued by the private sector. Debentures are the most common corporate debt instrument. Now, like in a government bond, these private sector bonds also have same features. There is a principal value. Principal value means face value. Maturity. What is the duration? 5 year, 10 year. What is the maturity? And interest rates. Interest rate is applicable. Call and redemption features. Call means when you issue a corporate bond, you have the right to recall it. Investment you can recall, which means you can premature it, which means the call option. Redemption means before the maturity date, you can retire it. In a way, it's prematuring. Let's say you issue for 10 years. At 8 years time, you premature it, redeem. So those options are available for the issuer actually. Protective covenants means there are some conditions attached to corporate bonds. These are used to give some protection for the investors. Protective covenants means some protection related conditions attached to the bond. So there are two types of bonds mainly, as I said, corporate bonds, debentures and commercial papers. Debentures are the most popular ones among corporate bonds. They are actually medium to long-term interest-bearing bonds. Now, these are very similar to government bonds. The government bonds are, you call it treasury bill bonds. Private sector similar bonds, you call it debentures. These are issued by private sector companies, banks, or other financial institutions. Usually issued by large, well-established institutions. You need to have some, credit rating when you issue a debenture. And the holders of debentures are called as creditors. So if you have an investor in a debenture, you call him as a creditor. Now, what is the importance of a debenture? since these are debt instruments, in the case of a bankruptcy, liquidation, the bondholders, debenture holders get the priority. So their liabilities will be paid first if you have debentures in your company. You have issued debentures, people have purchased the debentures, and in the case of a bankruptcy, you pay those people first. Okay. So these are very secured instruments in the market. Commercial papers, sometimes you call them as short-term, non-collateralized, unsecured debt instruments. Now here, these are a lot of protections are available. Commercial papers for urgent funding needs, short-term funding needs, they issue these commercial papers. Actually, debentures are listed in the stock market, but commercial papers are not listed. So in that sense, debentures are secure. Commercial papers do not have that security. These are issued by high reputed private sector firms for their urgent funding needs. Especially the credit-worthy institutions, they issue these commercial papers to the market and to their known investor bases for urgent funding needs. Now, for example, in Sri Lanka, the commercial papers have been issued by John Keells. It's a reputed company, large company, private company. For their funding needs, they issue these securities. And since they are very highly credit-worthy companies, even though it is non-collateralized, unsecured, investors would buy because they are guaranteed. Usually sold at a discount means if the face value is 100, you can sell it at 90. So the difference is the income. So in that way, it is similar to a treasury bill, isn't it? It's like a treasury bill. You issue at a discount, but issued by the private players. Some commercial papers, they might be having interest, but it's optional. It does not have any compulsory. I mean, it's not compulsory to have any interest. You can issue at a discount, or you can make it an interest-bearing instrument. So up to now, we have covered the most important capital market instruments. There are two types of most important capital market instruments, shares and bonds. So today we have had a lengthy discussion on bonds. Bonds are two types, private bonds and government bonds. And government bonds can also be used under repurchase agreements. Okay. So let's stop at this point. Next week, we are starting with the discussion on shares, right? Shares and other financial products, including the structured financial products. So let's stop at this point. I'll see you next week at the same time. Okay. Have a good weekend. Good night.